There are two axioms, or two sayings, that I want to mention today. One is that time heals all wounds. Is that true? As I hold a big sword in my hand, does time heal all wounds? What if I pass this through your gut and rip it out and say, we'll give you an hour. You'll be fine. It depends on what organs maybe I hit, but given time, you would probably die. If I didn't hit anything major, it might heal by itself, but if not treated, what happens? You get infected and all that good stuff, right? So time heals all wounds. How about people never change? How many have you heard that? People never change. Is that true? Is it common that people don't change? Maybe. The story, the scripture, and if you fall asleep today, just saying, I'll leave it right here. In our scripture today, from Genesis chapter 37, we are talking about Joseph. Now, 2 weeks ago, when Ian was here, he talked about names and calling names. And he talked about a man named Jacob, whose name was changed to what? Israel, right? And what does Israel mean? What does that name mean? This struggle, he who struggles, right? He who struggles and prevails. So Israel wrestled with God, or wrestled with an angel, and he prevailed in a way. And so the nation that God chose to be his people in the Old Testament covenant was Israel. He who struggles with God, he who struggles. Now, next week we begin a series from the book of Exodus. This is a good precursor to Exodus and a good follow-up through what we have learned over the past month. With Joseph, the struggle between God and his people continue. Bobby read the scripture where we left off that Joseph was his father's favorite. Now, a quick background. Joseph had several brothers, but he had one brother from the same woman named Benjamin, from the mother of Rachel, right? The other brothers were from different moms. So Israel in his old age preferred, or loved, if you will, more Joseph. And he treated him special, gave him this nice robe of multicolored textures and everything else. And his brothers despised him because he was specially treated, to the point where, as we already read, that they plotted to kill him, to throw him in an empty well. But ended up, what happened? One brother said, let's not kill him. I think it was Reuben. Let's sell him. So some merchants came from going to Egypt. They sold their brother into slavery to Egypt. What happened then? Well, first, let's turn to chapter 42 of Genesis, verse 6. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold grain to all his people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him and their faces to the ground. We'll stop there. We read first that Joseph was thrown into a pit and sold. Now in this verse, we fast forwarded a few chapters and several years to he is a powerful commander under Pharaoh in Egypt. And those same brothers who tossed him into the pit and sold him are before him. I ask you those same two questions. Do people change? Does time heal all wounds? If you had the people in front of you whose intent was to sell you in slavery and they didn't care what happened to you, in front of you, and you had the power to do whatever you wanted to them, how would you respond? What would you do? What would you want to do? What goes through your heads? Hold that question, those questions in your mind as we backtrack now to see quickly what happened to get to a point where this man who was 17 years old when he was sold and left, 2 years later became powerful in the country of Egypt. How did that happen? In Genesis 37, verses 23 through 27, we read that he was sold into slavery. But if we go to verse 36, it says, "Meanwhile, the Midianites who bought him sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard." We skip down to verse 1 of chapter 39. "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master." After being thrown into a pit by his own family, who first wanted to kill him, changed their mind, sold him for silver to the Ishmaelites. They didn't care what happened. Went to Egypt, sold him then to a man named Potiphar, who was a officer in Pharaoh's government. Egypt being one of the most, if not most powerful countries then. What happened while he went to Potiphar's house? First, how would you feel if you were Joseph, being bound by your brothers, being tossed into a pit, maybe hearing them about them wanting to kill you, then being brought up, being sold, being carried off as a slave to a foreign country by your own family, but now he's sold again to a officer in Pharaoh's country, a man named Potiphar. How would you feel? If we read in chapter 39, verse 2, again, I said last week, we kind of read over things quickly and we forget or we gloss over things. Verse 2, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered." Wait a minute. The 17-year-old teenager was bound and gagged by his brother, sold into a pit, sold into slavery, and resold again. And it says here in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. What kind of God is that allows his servant to be bound, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery? What did Joseph do to do that, to deserve that? And it says that he prospered. How was that prospering? What happened, for those of you who are familiar with this story, what happened when he was in the house of Potiphar? Was Potiphar cruel to him? Did Joseph whine and complain that he was sold by his brothers and he's now a slave? What did he do? He bloomed where he was planted. Now, of course, we don't get a detailed account of every day or week or anything, but this is a very generalized account. He did what he was meant to do. And Potiphar took notice, and what did Potiphar do? What's that? Yeah, you just do such a great job. And he noticed that God blesses you. Whatever you do prospers. You're in charge of my household, Joseph. Wow. So from being captured by his brothers, being thrown into a pit, wanting to be killed, then sold as slaves twice, God says God had a plan for him. He bloomed where he was planted. He did what he was supposed to do. And God blessed him and was with him. And Potiphar noticed and put him in charge. Until, next slide please. Potiphar's wife. Dun dun dun. Potiphar's wife liked Joseph very much and tried to seduce him more than once. But Joseph, being the righteous man that he was, had nothing to do with it. So the last time this happened, she tried to seduce him when no one else was around, and he said no. And as he ran off, his cloak fell off in her hands. And so, you know what? She framed him. She screamed. His husband, Potiphar, found out about it. And we read in verse 19 of chapter 39, when his master heard the story that his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, there's a whole explanation here, because rightfully so, he should have been put to death. And if you read some more context and history about this stuff, Potiphar could actually have been mad more at his wife, because he knew the character of Joseph and knew the character of his wife. But instead of putting him to death, he threw him into a prison within his own palace, a prison that the political people would also go to. So now we have Joseph, who was enslaved, sold and enslaved, put in charge, but now back in prison again. How is God with him? How is God prospering him? Verse 20 of chapter 39. But while Joseph was there in prison, somebody read that real loud for me. Verse 21. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. But wait, God, if you're with your people, why does this bad stuff happen? The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. I'm not sure I would be very grateful at this point. God, thank you. I serve you, but look at what you have done so far. Maybe we should part company now. But it says God showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden what? Puts Joseph in charge of all those held in prison. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever it did. Can good come from bad situations? Can good come from your bad choices? Can good come from others' bad choices? Doesn't mean that we should choose badly. No. Well, if God can make good out of sin, then why not sin? Because God can take care of it. It's not quite how it works. What it shows is that God is such a good God. He can make good from bad. We read then in chapter 40, if we progress quickly, he's put in that prison when two of Pharaoh's officials come, who Pharaoh got mad at, a cupbearer and a baker, because he was thrown in there. And Joseph was given care over them. So he got to know Pharaoh's inner court. They had dreams, and Joseph, through God's help, interpreted those dreams for them. 2 years later, those dreams came true. One was put to death by Pharaoh. One went back to Pharaoh in his court. But didn't mention Joseph at all. But the connection was there. To speed through this whole story, Pharaoh then had dreams. 2 dreams. And nobody in his court could interpret those dreams and tell him what they meant. No magician, no diviner, no wise men. That's when the person who was released from prison said, "Oh, I forgot. There's this Hebrew man named Joseph in prison who told me my dreams, and they came true. Go get him." So they got Joseph, brought him to Pharaoh. Pharaoh told him the dreams. What did Joseph say? "I got this. No problem." That's not what he said. "I can't do this, but my God can." But God can. So God gave him the interpretation of the dreams, and it warned Pharaoh of 7 years of plenty, of harvest, land overflowing with food, but then 7 years of utter famine and destitution. Then Joseph came up with a plan to have the government save food, so that when that famine hit, they would have food to eat and enough to feed the nations around them as well. So Pharaoh made Joseph second in command under him. And so we have, let me read then from verse 39 of chapter 41. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all of my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So he's set in charge, and he makes these changes and stores of food for 7 years. Let me fast forward 7 years, and the famine hits. Chapter 41, verse 56. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was so severe in all the world. Now let's go to verse 6 of chapter 42. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold grain to all his people. So when just his brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And now I ask you some questions here. Number one question is, how long has it been since Joe last saw his brothers? Any idea? You're a scholar. 20 plus years. About 20 years. He was in Potiphar's house and jail for 11 years. We're not sure how that kind of divides up. He was 17 when he was put into slavery. He was 30 when he came to power in Egypt. So it's been 20 years now since he saw his brothers. And what did his brothers do? There was the cause of him going to Egypt. How would Joseph react after 20 years? Let me fast forward quickly to modern day and ask you a question. Have you ever been hurt by someone? No matter how slight, or no matter how badly. Have you ever not resolved that? If it's been a long time, has time healed those wounds by itself? And I'm talking to myself here as well, asking these same questions. How would you react, or how do you react when you see that person again? Or if you could, and it's not resolved? What did Joseph do after 20 years? Do people change? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out. What did Joseph do? He tests them. He tests his brothers, and he says this, because they know that Egypt has plenty of food. Their father Israel sends them to Egypt to get the food, except for Benjamin. Benjamin is Joseph's little brother, his only other brother from Rachel. So they're both special to Israel. They send all the others there. They come before Joseph. Joseph knows who they are. They have no clue. How does Joseph feel? One possibility, let's have some fun with this. Finally, my revenge. And in a way, he kind of does. But in a way, it's really testing them. Because let's think here, what happened? He was singled out by his father, treated specially, which caused jealousy and animosity and tension, to the point that, now was Joseph innocent? Do you think that maybe he didn't do anything wrong? Why would you tell your brothers some dreams about you being in charge over them? I have two sons. I was a brother too, and if I had something over my brother who's older than me, I would say, let me twist this in a little bit. I'm going to be in charge of you in a few years. Ha ha ha. I can just see Joseph be very arrogant and smug. Now, it's reading into it, but if you think about family dynamics, maybe he had some of that stuff coming, in a way of speaking. But now he has the brothers who were the cause of his misery, or that was their intent, in front of him. What's he do? You're spies. No, we're not. You're spies. No, we're not. Prove it. You say you have one more brother, a younger one, because this kind of came out in the whole conversation. Go back home, and I'll give you some supplies to help you and your dad. Then come back with him, and then I know that you're telling the truth, that you're here just to get food. Well, we don't want to do that because our father loves Benjamin. Well, then guess what? It's too bad for you, right? This is Dave's paraphrase. So he threw him in jail for 3 days. At the end of those 3 days, Joseph says, you know what, fine. I'm going to keep one of you, Simeon, back in jail. You go home, take the food. I'll even give you back your money for it. Go see your dad, then come back and bring Benjamin. Then I'll know that you're telling the truth. So they leave. Simeon stays. They tell their father, it's like, I can't give my son. I've already lost one son, Joseph. I'm not going to lose Benjamin now. So they stay for a while. They exhaust their supplies from Egypt. And so the sons go, Dad, we need more food. Then go back to Egypt. We can't go back because we need Benjamin. So finally, Israel, Jacob, concedes. Fine, take him to Egypt and get some more food. So they do. They go back, and they go back to the court of Joseph. And what happens? We test him some more. They bring him to a nice big meal, which is not common for foreigners to come to an Egyptian court. They feed him, he wines them, he dines them, and all that good stuff. To the point now where, what do you do? He sees Benjamin, he leaves, he cries, because all those emotions. He comes back more composed. He tries to kind of play this kind of charade more and more, but finally he can't. And in verse 1 of chapter 45, we see what happens. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence!" So there was no one but Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Can you imagine that moment when they realized who he was? I won't say any of the words in church. but some come to mind. Ha! We're done. We're done. Verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." Again. Yeah. Come close to me. Right? When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." Again, oh crap, we're dead. But he says, "And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there had been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was," listen to these words, "it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt." Next slide, please. I pressed the wrong button. So, it was not you who sent me, but God. That in itself has a whole bunch of implications. Does God do things to intentionally hurt his people? Does God do things to put people in precarious situations? Well, at the very best, God allows things to happen. Does God know about these things? Yeah. Does God allow some of these things to happen? Yeah. Does God work these things into his plan? Yeah. Does that mean God isn't with you? Didn't we read 2 or 3 times that the Lord was with Joseph? Some lessons and some observations here. Number 1, God can and does use good and bad for his purposes. God can and does use good and bad for his purposes. Do we enjoy it? Does God want his people to suffer? No, I don't think he does. But there's this thing called free will that doesn't shock God at all. We have the ability to choose right and wrong, good and evil, every day, every second. We can do it. But God knows our choices already. And he weaves it into his plan. No matter what situation you are in today, God is with you. And you may be angry, just like if I'm sitting at the bottom of a pit here, my siblings argue whether I should live or die. I wouldn't be very happy. I wouldn't feel God in that pit. I'm like, what are you doing? It was like my Mickey Mouse voice. What are you doing? Sorry. I wouldn't have very much enjoyed being sold as a slave, going to a foreign land, but God blessed him and used him in Potiphar's house, but then his wife was kind of not very nice. Got thrown back in prison again, but guess what? What happened there? God blessed him because what did Joseph do? He continued to be who he was, who God made him, no matter his situation. There's a bigger picture. Hence, the view from that pit, you can just put it on that picture, it's fine. The view from that pit looking up is not a good view. Ha, there it is. All right. Give you a raise back there. Double your salary. There's a bigger picture than what he saw, and likewise for you. no matter what you're facing, there's a bigger picture than what you know. Point 3, thrive where you are planted. Thrive where you are planted. Whether it's in a pit, in jail, whether it's in E-Town or Harrisburg, does that mean that God doesn't move us? He may. But it's according to what he wants. And that's where we need to be sensitive to where his Spirit leads. But you don't think of an ideal situation, because you'll never get it. If you're here looking for an ideal church, don't come back. We will mess you up. Because we're messed up. But we can be messed up together. That's the beauty of it all. We're not perfect. We are all on the same journey, which we'll get there in just a second too. Point 4, yes, people can change. Joseph changed. But who else changed in this story? That doesn't quite get as much attention as Joseph. His siblings. Judah, from where the tribe of Judah gets its name, from the house of David, from where Christ came from. Judah was the one who had the idea, let's sell him to slaves as a slave. So here, when he was sold, they didn't care about how that made their father feel. They didn't care about Joseph. They cared about themselves. Fast forward now, what's happening? You don't take Benjamin. My dad would die if you took Benjamin from him. Take me instead. Again, read the story. It's all in there. Judah and his brothers changed as well. But it wasn't just time. It was 20 plus years. What changed them? Their experiences changed them, and God changed them. You can allow your current situation to change you for the worse or change you for the better. And guess whose choice that is? It's not your parents. It's not your spouses. It's not your mom or dad. Not your siblings. It's one person's choice. Yourself. Does that make it easy? No. But guess who was with you? Last point. Sanctification is a lifelong process. It's a big word. It simply means inward change. Inward change, to be like Jesus, is lifelong. When you are saved, when you believe in Jesus, you are sanctified. You are made holy inside through him. Does that make you perfect? No. Does that make you get everything right? No. Does that change all of your bad habits instantaneously? No. That begins the process, though. It took 20 years for Joseph and his siblings to get back together, and they both changed. They allowed their situation, and God, through his infinite wisdom, weaved in that chance to transform them. And that's my challenge for you and for me today. As we set up to begin Exodus next week, we fast forward some more time to where Joseph's family were welcome guests in Egypt, to fast forward 400 years, and they're all slaves. Where are you? Where do you see yourself in this story? Joseph in the pit? How do you react? How do you react to people who treat you badly, who have hurt you? When you hold a grudge, who's that hurt? Not them. It hurts you, and quite possibly those around you who have to live with you, because it makes you bitter and angry. God is with you. He won't leave you. And no matter where you find yourself in life, bloom, flourish. People will see your good deeds, see your heart, And perhaps we'll say, who is this God you serve?